You know, Abby, one of the things that I love about you all is that I think this place is rooted in freedom for so many different reasons. One of those reasons is that I think it's a place of safety where you can come and you can be your full self and you can be integrated in who that self is, that you can learn that there's not like sacred and secular, that you don't have to have secrets, that you can just be you. And there's been so many journeys in the life of New Abbey where people find freedom. Like I remember 13 years ago starting New Abbey, you know how many coffees and beers that I have, like having to walk through people like, is hell real? I don't get one of those beers in like the last 5 years. Because I think there's podcasts and books and access to resources where you're like, oh, there's just a bigger story out there. Like there's parts of theology that we don't have to accept anymore. Yes, I don't believe in hell, just in case you were wondering about that. Okay, there you go, yeah. I know you were wondering. Or like a simple one in a community like this is for how many of you had a process for such a long time of can I be gay and can I be Christian? Is that allowed? That you came from worlds where you weren't allowed to be both of those things, that you had to pick one thing or the other. The journey that so many of you had to go on, and you listened to Matthew Vines and this YouTube and that YouTube, and you had to learn the 4 different Greek words that were in the New Testament about homosexuality and was it okay and what did that mean, and you had to tell your aunt at Thanksgiving about what those words meant, and then she had to learn them, and then you guys had to both disagree, and then she read the King James Version Bible. You know how it goes. It was a lot. And then you found freedom and you realized like, oh, my humanity was never in question. My value was never in question. I've always been made in the image of God. I don't have to debate 4 Greek words at Thanksgiving anymore. So not interesting. Some of you come from communities where it was like what you're allowed to do in church and what you're not allowed to do to church. And even like grow up in the world in like the 90s where like, are we allowed to have drums? Anyone from those churches? That's crazy, right? There's like injustices going on in the world, and we're like, tambourines are fine. They're fine. So there's so many things that happen in the life of the church, and I'm sure that we'll look back 50 years from now, and we'll look at the things that we're doing, and there'll be new versions of freedom. But what I love about this place is that you keep finding freedom. You keep finding truer versions of yourself where you can be more whole and more integrated. And I love that about you, New Abbey. I love that about us and the things that we're doing. And this month and going into September, we're going to be in this series on maturity. It's what I talked about a few weeks back, and Josh talked about last week. It's going to be talked about over the next 3 weeks. And I want to keep thinking about this idea of how do we understand maturity, and now how do we understand our freedom, and how do we understand our freedom in light of maturity? Because freedom grows. Freedom evolves. Freedom, when you just first start out, is like, oh, I'm free. I can do whatever I want now. And then some of you tried doing whatever you want, and you're like, it wasn't awesome. Because what we thought is like, no, they told me all of the things over here that I couldn't do or that I shouldn't do, and I had my chance, and I was going to be me, and I'm going to do my things, and then I did the things, and that actually wasn't freedom. And so freedom begins with understanding who you are. Freedom begins with the unity prayer that we say every single week, knowing within your bones, within your soul, within who you are at a cellular level that I am a child loved by God and that God enjoys me. And now I'm going to grow up. I'm going to adult. I'm going to mature. I'm going to make sure that my freedom doesn't just work for me, that my freedom works for more. For all? Is that even possible? What do those things even look like? So to talk about freedom and maturity, we're going to talk about some things. We're going to talk about the immediate. And if we can talk about the immediate, then we're going to talk about the ultimate. And if we can talk about the ultimate, then we're going to talk about what it means to be integrated. And if we can be integrated, then the good. And if we can do the good, then adulting's just hard, people. It's just hard. But we'll try working on it with one another. And if we can do adulting, then, you haven't heard this word in a while, the glory, my friends. Yeah, there you go, the glory. Follow along with me in 1 Corinthians chapter 10. I have the right to do anything, you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience, for the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. If an unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, eat whatever is put before you without raising questions of conscience. By the way, I know this is super relevant to your lives. Most of you are worried about what you're getting at the carniceria right now and if it's idol worship food or not. But just stick with me here a little bit. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, then do not eat it both for the sake of the one who told you and for the sake of conscience. I'm referring to the other person's conscience, not yours. For why is my freedom being judged by another's conscience, you may ask? If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do it all for the glory of God. Do not cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God, even as I try to please everyone in every way. For I am not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. Might be a hot minute since you heard a passage like this. But man, what I love about the scriptures, what I love about our faith tradition is how these things hold true for thousands of years. We got to do some work sometimes for them to hold true in different ways. None of us belong in an idol-worshiping community where we burn sacrifices of meats to our gods, although I've been to a few Super Bowl parties. That was a bad dad joke. That was like, I cringed saying it out loud. Not planned, just came from my heart. You're welcome. And then we got to do work because many of us are in a place like New Abbey because you're refiguring out your faith. You're resorting out what's important, right? You're figuring it out so much so that you chose to show up to a church next to Dodger Stadium on a Sunday in August of 2026. So some of this still matters for you. You're still interested in what the Bible says. You're still interested in experiencing God. There's this way of Jesus that's somehow still compelling enough for you to be present in this place. You're here. And so we're asking bigger questions, reframing, looking at passages like this and saying, man, what truth is there for us in this? And there's tons of it. Because what Paul's doing is he's talking to this church in Corinth, and Corinth is so much like Los Angeles today, that Corinth is a cosmopolitan city where there's tons of things going on, and it's a group of people who are figuring out their faith in a new way. They're figuring out this Jesus way of life, and they're saying, hey, this Jesus way of life is interesting to me, and I want to do it. But also I'm figuring out this Jesus way of life in like a complex universal city like Corinth, like Los Angeles. And the main things that Paul talks about in Corinthians is things like money and legality and what it looks like to be in relationships and sexual ethics. And I know none of that applies to anybody in this room. So Paul is saying, yes, there's this way of Jesus and you're experiencing this new freedom. And so let's talk about what this freedom would look like if it evolved and if it grew. And so what Paul talks about at first, he's like, let's talk about the immediate. Let's talk about the thing that's just right in front of your face. And the immediate is present all of the time. We live in a world of the immediate. And in the immediate, he's talking in this story about food sacrificed to idols, and you're experiencing your new freedom, and now you can do whatever you want, and you know who you are in God, and nobody can question you, particularly not your MAGA family at Christmas, right? So you're just like, no, I'm doing me. You don't get to judge me. I can put whatever I want in whatever comment section. I don't know why I'm going so hard on this right now, but you get the point, people. We've all been there. I've been there in the last 13 years where I'm asking these same kind of questions. I can do anything. Why can't I just do anything? And then the question is like, well, you can do anything. You're right. But is it beneficial? Is it constructive? And it's not that you're not free, but maybe you're just asking the wrong questions. And not because anyone trying to restrict your freedom, but maybe there's even a better kind of freedom that's out there. And so Paul's like, yeah, you could do that. But is that the ultimate for you? We just came off this series on the summer in Nehemiah, and that series really explored like what's our purpose and who are we, the clarity that we can have in life if we have vision, right? We're all going to go somewhere, and some of us are going to go there on purpose, is what we talked about in Nehemiah. And what if we start going places on purpose, and what does that look like when we have this clarity of who we are? Now, that's an interesting way of living life. And so Paul's taking in that same kind of thinking. He's like, I want you to go somewhere on purpose, and I want you to think about, like, what's the ultimate of who you are? So all of Corinthians, Paul is trying to talk to this church about their freedom and his freedom and the ultimate of who they are. And you've got to ask yourself that question all the time of what guides me? What's my principle? What's the best of what I bring into the world? And are the choices that I'm making today living into the ultimate? Me living out my purpose, my dreams, my vision for who I am and what I can become? Or did I choose the immediate today? Sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're not. And by the way, I'm not giving like a sermon up here. It's like something I'm great at. I struggle with this every single day, and I think that's why I'm preaching on it and thinking about it. I know, in a very simple story, how good I feel when I exercise for like 30 to 45 minutes every day. I know how good I feel when I get a sweat on. I haven't worked out in 9 days. Yeah, I know, 9 whole days. And I say it like I worked out every day before that. I probably worked out 9 days ago and like 17 days before. The point is, it's hard. It's hard. And I love sleeping in. I love a lazy morning. I love all of the things, right? And I know this sounds like such like an old school 90s sermon that I can't even believe is coming out of my mouth, but I think it's so real. Sometimes I choose the immediate all of the time versus the ultimate of what I know actually like really works for my life. It's not even about physically feeling better. I know how I feel in my mental health, in my emotional health, and in my soul when I go for a run and I smile and endorphins are cruising through my bones. I can take that version of that story a million different ways. And I think Paul's taken that version of the story a million different ways, which is you can determine your ultimate for you. And what Paul's always bringing us to is how often are we choosing the immediate at the cost of the ultimate? And only you can answer that for yourself. That's the beauty of freedom. That's the beauty of maturity. You don't live in a church in a world anymore where your youth pastor Todd tells you how far is too far. You got to go figure that out on your own. You got to use the wisdom of people around you, and you got to figure out what life looks like as an adult in Los Angeles in 2026 as you're finding your freedom. And you're going to go along the way. And sometimes the immediate is great and it's fun and it's not unhealthy. I'm not saying it's evil. It's none of that. This isn't a morality conversation in it. This is saying, oh, no, I'm mature and I'm going to ask different questions about my life because I have the ability to already name what the ultimate is, what my purpose is, what my vision is, the clarity that I have for my life. And I'm going to go begin to make choices that honor that ultimate. That's all that Paul's bringing the church in Corinth into here. He's trying to remind them of a bigger story of what they could be about. But then Paul does it in some interesting ways. He doesn't leave it at self-help talk about what's the ultimate for you. And so often, I will leave these conversations here. What's the ultimate for me? The only person so many times in my universe is me. My wife got back yesterday. She was gone for a week. My whole family was gone for a week, and we get into a conversation. And we had like a little disagreement before we both got on the plane about some things. And like I've been processing it emotionally all week of just like, I am so hurt, right? And you know what I didn't think about all week? How did I impact her? We were joking about it this morning, right? I'm just like, oh, I can get so lost in me that I don't always think about how am I impacting others. I can get so lost in the ultimate of what Cory's story is that I don't always bring myself to think about where others are at. And where I love that Paul goes with this story when he's bringing us into maturity, he says, hey, here's where I want you to start to go. Church of Corinth, Church of New Abbey, universally for all human beings everywhere. As I want you to live in this delta, in this evolutionary spectrum of freedom here. And you have your initial freedom where you get to know who you are at your deepest level. And you get to live your freedom for your life. And it's so amazing when you get to live that because, man, so many of you, man, you had to hide from yourselves. You had to hide who you truly were for so long. And no longer do you have to do that. So start there. But, man, that ain't the end. Now what Paul says is let's take another step down this road. And Paul talks about the good. He's saying, yeah, you can do anything. And now put another question in your vocabulary that when you want to go do anything, you have to ask yourself, is this not just fulfilling the ultimate for me, let alone the immediate, right? Is this also fulfilling the good of others around me? Am I thinking through that lens? When I step into this conversation, when I have this relationship, the job that I want, the project that I'm creating, any version of life, am I just adding one more layer within me that says, yes, I know what my purpose is. I know what I'm all about. I know the things that are really shaping me, and that was so hard to get to on its own. Now I'm going to take one step further. I'm going to say, no, I'm a part of this bigger thing. I'm a part of church. I'm a part of faith. I'm guided by these principles in this life of Jesus. And I'm going to ask myself, what is the good of others? And that is such a challenging question to ask sometimes. And it's such a challenging question to ask in a complex world like ours. And when Paul asks the question of what's the good of others that you should be thinking about, it's actually not a moral word. It's this pragmatic word that Paul's using. In here, he's talking about, is what you're doing constructive? And it's literally, in the Greek, it's this language around construction, right? That you know, if you were to go look at a construction project, if something is being built appropriately. There's just like the first level of it being built appropriately. Like, is it structurally sound? Is it engineered safe? Are we doing things in the proper order with the foundation and all of the things that you need to do in construction for this building to stand the test of time, right? And then you begin to put all the other layers on this building. And Paul's just saying, hey, think about it that way. Is what you're doing a part of the good? Are you constructing something that's going to stand the test of time? That's all that you're asking here. This isn't some like moral guilty sermon. This is just saying, hey, are the decisions, the practices, the rhythms, the rituals of my life, am I participating not only in the ultimate story of what my life is and my purpose and what God has for me, but am I also beginning to build on a foundation of what's good for others? Because that's going to stand a different test of time. And when I also think about the good of others, man, it's so much more enjoyable when other people participate in the things that I'm constructing in this world, right? And when I'm participating in things that they're constructing in this world. So Paul is just taking us down the road here a little bit of saying, great, here's the ultimate version of your life. You're going to ask yourself that deeper question of like, am I participating in good for others? What does that look like? And God knew, Abby, here's what I love about this place. That thing is not prescriptive. So if I'm like, you're like, oh, Cory's on one this morning. He is, that's correct. And this isn't your 1990s church where I'm going to tell you the three things that are prescriptive and you have to follow these moral rules, and if you don't do that, you're horrible. No, this is descriptive. You got to go figure out some of the stuff for your own life and how this actually works, because life's complicated. You know some things that are just good for you. I named something so simple earlier of like, this is mind-blowing rocket science. Read books on it. Working out makes you feel better, right? I've noticed in my life, when I don't have margaritas versus having 4, I wake up better the next day. I know. Is he a spiritual prophet, you say? No. There are just things that you know better. And there are patterns, even joking aside from that, that you know better in your life when you're brave with your boss in a certain way and you stand up for yourself, how much better you feel the next day going into work. When you go to therapy and you take good care of your soul, who you are when you show up into your relationships. There's so many things that you already know and trust about yourself. And this is saying, keep going. Keep going with that. Keep asking those really interesting questions. That's going to serve you well. And that's a way of Jesus, to keep being curious, not only about yourself, but then taking one step further and saying, hey, am I curious about the good of others around me? And then the story moves one step further. And this is like, I haven't talked in this way in a long time, but I've been thinking about it a lot the last couple weeks. Not only am I thinking about the ultimate for me, which again, I hope you do so much work there, New Abbey, because man, when a human being fully alive is the glory of God. Irenaeus, 2nd century, feel free to tweet that. Then, are you thinking about the good of others? And then the final is the glory. And he ends with, do it for the glory of God. And you're like, what a word that I haven't used in a long time. So I did a deep dive on glory because I'm a pastor, and this is what I do at 6 a.m. And the word glory in Greek is this word for doxa. And that word is like weightiness. It's like substance. It's like presence in your life. It's another word that comes from a Hebrew word, which is kavod, and that's like glory. And then whenever they would use this word kavod in the Old Testament, it's whenever they would experience God's presence showing up into the tabernacle or into the temple, right? Any of you listen to like Amy Grant songs back in the day? Yeah, you can admit it here. This is a safe place, right? Yeah, so you remember songs like this. The Shekinah glory of God, those kind of big fancy words you used to hear in charismatic church back in the day, right? This is what it's saying. It's saying, yeah, the problem with that is that we would talk about God's glory in some temple back there, over there, or you would have to like do purification rituals in your own life, confess in a certain way, do all the things, right? And then you would experience God's glory. It's not any of that. It's saying that God's glory, God's presence, God's weightiness is already always there. And it's about you experiencing and you slowing down to this reality, to seeing that and to knowing that. And to knowing that it's not about like God's presence in some tabernacle over there, but what Paul is talking about in 1 Corinthians, like you are the temple of God. You get to experience God's presence and God's goodness and God's glory all of the time. And what is another question that you're asking in your questions of life about the choices that we're making in our practices and our rituals and our habits of not only is this about the ultimate for me, is that what I'm participating in? Am I also participating in the good of others? But man, am I participating in such a way that I see the glory of God? And again, not in some moralistic, I don't even know, like holiness version of church. I'm talking about like deep mystical spirituality here, where you get to open your eyes and your heart and your ears to this incredible reality that God's presence is always with you. And what I just know from so many conversations with you, and what I know in my own life is, man, there's something so beautiful about those moments. Have you ever just slowed down and the wind blew the right way and you just knew like, oh my God, like God's here? Have you ever just been in that moment in a sunset or in a movie, or you laughed with your cousin all night long and you're so tired, but you're like, man, I think God's here. It's just saying, man, isn't that what you really want? Isn't that slowing down, being connected to the divine in that way, the thing that you really want? Now that's freedom. And then it's saying this, not only is that freedom, but how do you live in such a way that other people can experience that freedom as well? Because your presence, your being, your way of living is so transformed, it's so mature, that your freedom is not just for you, that your freedom is for others around you. You ever been just around an old person who makes you feel better every time you're around them? I think there's only two kinds of old people. Because like by the time you become 90, you just are who you are, right? And my version of life is they're either just real spiteful and mean. Anyone ever experienced those old people? You're like, how have they lived so long? The devil, I think, is in them. I'm not sure. They couldn't die if you did a stake to their heart, right? That was my Texas grandma. May she rest in peace. That's a real story. Sad story, but my therapist has processed it, so we're okay. And then there's those other old people, and there's just something about them that when you enter the room, they expose all of the goodness and the kindness and the beauty of who you are. If you ever met my wife's grandparents, great-grammy and great-grandpa, oof, if you stepped into the room, your ultimate was alive, right? If you've ever met TJ's dad, Guy, oof, your ultimate is alive. There are these people in the world, and it's like, oh, that's who I want to be. I want to be at the end of my life. I want to be moving towards that kind of freedom. Where the immediate, man, sometimes there's moments for it, right? So good, so fun, enjoy it. So cool that you get to be free. And you're not worried about other people limiting your humanity. And then there's like, oh, but man, there's freedom where I'm just living into my full purpose. And I know what it's like when I'm alive. I know what it's like when I'm creating. I know what it's like when I wake up in the morning and I just lived out my purpose of who I am. And then there are those moments of like, man, there was something just so beautiful that my ultimate impacted so many good people around me, that not only am I creating films, I'm creating a platform for other people to share that are short films, because I know what it's like to be that writer who's never had their work seen before. And now I know what it's like to win an Oscar. Congratulations, right? Because you're participating not only in your ultimate, but the good of others. New Abby, your stories are in all of these things, right? And not only do I know what it's like to do that, but man, the glory of God. Wait, I thought you went to some like liberal progressive church where like gay people and everyone are like allowed to be human beings, so you're conservatives. I know, but I'm just talking about the glory of God, Grandma. That's what we do at New Abbey, you know? We're just living into our ultimate glory of God because we want to make sure that everybody else understands that the presence of God is completely for them at all times, period, and that there's no limitations to this glory of God and presence and relationship with God. Isn't that a more beautiful way to live? That's who we are, New Abbey. That's the story that we want to live into in Los Angeles, and that's a beautiful thing. Would you find those same 3 or 4 people around you, and would you answer this question? How can you share your freedom this week? Enjoy.